cemeteries in Florida. And this journey began with the rediscovery of Zion Cemetery in Tampa, a historical African-American cemetery that was purposely forgotten and later built upon. Zion Cemetery, and potentially thousands more just like it were cruelly erased from the history and public record, desecrating the graves of so many Black men and women and children who were laid to rest there. So in response to the rediscovery of Zion Cemetery, Representative Driskell and I filed and passed legislation to establish a task force within the Florida Department of State with a mission to identify these abandoned cemeteries and offer recommendations on how to properly honor and recognize the people that are interned there. After months of hard work and determination, I'm proud to say that my task force colleagues and I have completed our work and submitted our final recommendations to the governor and to legislative leadership. Today marks a new chapter in this journey as Representative Driskell and I filed Senate Bill 1588 and House Bill 1215, which seek to enact the recommendations of the task force into law. Other bills offer a comprehensive solution to identify, protect, maintain, not other bills, I said other bills, didn't I? Our bills want to memorialize the abandoned African-American cemeteries, as well as educate people on the history of these important resting places. And Senate Bill 1588 and House Bill 1215 will create a historic cemeteries program and an associated advisory council within the Division of Historical Resources at the Florida Department of State, which will coordinate the state's efforts around the historic cemeteries. This innovative program will serve as a central body for recording the abandoned cemeteries in the Florida's master site file records. It will develop guidelines for the identification and maintenance of abandoned cemeteries, and will operate as a coordinating kind of liaison to organize the organizations that are reaching out to and working on the abandoned cemeteries. Additionally, our legislation creates an opportunity for the Florida Department of Education to establish a curriculum regarding abandoned cemeteries, so Florida students can learn about the deep history of these sacred grounds. Representative Driskell and I are proud, really, really proud, to take the findings of the task force and work to make them a reality. And together, I believe that we'll be able to make a positive impact on this incredible, important issue. I am so proud to be part of this and proud to be helping Rep. Driskell with the heavy lifting and pushing this legislation forward. We see it as one foot in front of the other as we move forward. And I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Representative Fentrice Driskell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Cruz. It's been a pleasure working with you as well as the other members of the task force. And thank you all for joining us today, members of the media as well. I have to tell you that this has been a long time coming. And, you know, as Senator Cruz mentioned, so we first filed this bill in 2019, couldn't get the traction that we needed, came back in 2020, pushed forward in an even more bipartisan way. We're able to get the support that we needed and got it passed unanimously. And now the task force has worked so hard in conjunction with the Department of State and come up with what I think are very thoughtful proposals that should be implemented, that we would like to see implemented, which is why we filed this legislation so that we can make sure that this work continues into the future. So yes, as was aforementioned, I'm State Representative Fentrice Driskell. I have the honor of serving as the representative for Florida House District 63 in North Tampa and North Hillsborough County. I also serve as the policy chair and the leader designate elect of the Florida House Democratic Caucus. So I'm very honored to be carrying House Bill 1215 this legislative session, and I'm doing so on behalf of every African-American Floridian whose families' graves were neglected, abandoned, stolen, or forgotten. Over the past several months, the task force has worked very diligently to try to meet that task with honor. And so what you'll see in the bill is a statewide commitment to the identification and maintenance of abandoned African American cemeteries, with a dedicated Office of Historic Cemeteries within the Florida Department of State and an African American Cemeteries Advisory Commission. Floridians can be assured that this is a priority of the state now and that it will continue to be in the future as more cemeteries are unearthed. House Bill 1215 also encourages research on abandoned cemeteries by providing funding opportunities to public universities. We also made sure to target our younger generations by directing the Department of Education to create meaningful curriculum about historic cemeteries to engage students, because we know that while we cannot change the past, we can do our best in present times to remedy historical wrongs and secure the respect and dignity that is owed to every Floridian, regardless of their race or ethnicity, regardless of what their neighborhood or socioeconomic status may have been, even to those who have passed on before us. So again, thank you so much. And at this time, I'll open it up, I believe, Senator Cruz, to members of the task force who may also like to provide some comments.
Absolutely, thank you. Do we have any members of the task force that would like to add any information? Well, I don't see any, Rep Driskell. So should we open this up to the press and see if anyone has questions for us?
I think that would be the appropriate thing to do at this time. I did just want to acknowledge, I saw on the line Paul Guzzo, who's a reporter with the Tampa Bay Times, and just wanted to uplift the reporting that he did about the Zion Cemetery. That really was a spark and impetus for this legislation a couple years ago. So thank you, Paul, for joining us today. And thank you for the work that you continue to do on uncovering abandoned African-American cemeteries throughout the Tampa Bay area. We all are greatly indebted to you. Any questions at this time?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Josie Bros with the Florida Channel. I was wondering, is there any part of these recommendations that you think would be, I guess, what's the hardest sell in any of these recommendations for leadership?
I will say, Rep Driskell, you want to take this?
Sure, I'm happy to. So the hardest sell, and thank you for the question to Josie, the hardest sell is always resources, right? You know, the legislature comes and the one thing that we're constitutionally obligated to do is to pass a budget. We know that the budget was strained during the heart of the COVID pandemic, although it seems, of course, we're still in the heart of the pandemic with the Omicron variant running rampant at this time. But we had a great deal of federal resources to shore up Florida's budget. It's going to be interesting to see what the budget looks like this cycle. But in the legislation, we are calling for dedicated resources to create this division of historic cemeteries within the Department of State that comes with full-time employees. You know, there are other financial aspects of this where we're asking for funding for research, et cetera. So, you know, that's always the trickiest part. I'm encouraged, though, to the extent that, like I mentioned, we've been working on this now for 3 sessions in a row, and awareness continues to grow amongst our colleagues, both within our own caucuses and across the aisle. And so I'm optimistic that we can push and try to use this momentum from the task force to get some of these recommendations implemented.
And I will add that, you know, this bill that we passed last year was very different from the bill that you see that actually was signed into law. And that is because we had to remove most of the fiscal off of our bill before we could get it to move forward. We're not sure now. We don't know what we don't know. We haven't identified all of the cemeteries. We don't know what the condition of each cemetery is. We don't know if a cemetery is underneath or a piece of a cemetery is underneath, you know, Mrs. Smith's home. And what do? Do we memorialize the site? You know, how do we protect all of those involved while honoring those that have been dishonored? So, you know, we know that we are just scratching the surface with what we've done. And I completely agree with Rep Driskell that, you know, the heavy lift is asking for fiscal and asking for money. But I think with the ability to add some staff here, some of our findings recommend that we add staff in an office that will begin to identify some of that so that we can more clearly define what we need and what we will need relative to the money from the state that will help us make this better.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. I see a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Or it was identified. Heather Lee, I believe, has a question. Then we'll go to Paul Guzzo and then Emerald. Hi, Emerald. Let's start with Heather.
Hey, good afternoon. I know this may sound like an obvious question, but if you could just go over some of the recommendations that were made, that would be helpful. I would appreciate that.
Rep Driskell, you want to take that or you want me to take it?
Sure, I'll get started. And then if I left anything out, just let me know. So we identified some critical areas where we wanted to make recommendations. The first is identification and protection. And with that, we wanted to make sure that we were pushing for and adopting a statewide policy through legislation that supports the reasonable, non-invasive searches of unrecorded, abandoned, forgotten, lost, stolen, or stolen African-American cemeteries and burial sites. And there's some key provisions within that section. The first is to amend Chapter 267 of the Florida statutes to create an Office of Historic Cemeteries program within the Division of Historical Resources. And this is one of the big ways that the funding comes in, because we're requesting that the legislature support at least 3 full-time career service employees to adequately staff the program, at least one of whom must be tasked with maintaining a focus dedicated to African-American cemeteries. And the reason why this is important, our task force was focused on African-American cemeteries, but we know from a prior task force that was established by the legislature back in 1998 that abandoned cemeteries can be a problem for communities writ large. And so we need this office, but we definitely need to make sure that within that office there's someone who's dedicated to exploring these historical wrongs. This newly created office would serve as a nexus for recording and updating records of cemeteries established at least 50 years ago within the Florida Master File Site or Master Site File, and in conjunction with the Florida Public Archaeological Network. What that would do is help make sure that we have a record of where these cemeteries are located, so folks are not building on top of them, but also so that we can make sure that we memorialize them sufficiently. We also want to coordinate with the University of South Florida's Black Cemetery Network for the inclusion of abandoned African-American cemeteries within that network. We want to create an advisory commission on African-American historic cemeteries so that this work of the task force, if you will be able to continue, and that the state is receiving input from community leaders and stakeholders to make sure that they are moving in the right way. I'll just mention a few other of the big key points, Heather. I don't want to, I feel like I'm belaboring the point, but we also identified maintenance as a big bucket. And we want to make sure that if there is suspicion, reasonable suspicion, or credible evidence that supports the existence of a cemetery on, underneath, or adjacent to a property, that we're providing permission for a legally authorized person to access the private property with appropriate notice to the owner of the property, to be able to check in a non-invasive way whether or not there is in fact a cemetery located underneath the ground. The third bucket is education. We mentioned that we want curriculum established so that we help students engage in understanding their history and social responsibility around understanding this history. And then the fourth bucket is memorialization, establishing a state priority for the placement of state historical markers for erased, forgotten, lost, abandoned, and stolen African-American cemeteries. So those are some of the highlights. And of course, you can always read more by visiting the Florida legislature's websites and taking a look at the text of the bill. I think next we will go to Paul Guzzo.
Yeah, my question was in relation, and you mentioned it just there, if credible evidence supports a determination that there is an abandoned cemetery, that the property owner must provide some sort of access to the state. So would that mean if a property owner denies having a cemetery on their property, but there is enough historic documented proof to say there could be, the property owner cannot deny the state access, like they have to let somebody on to look?
Well, I think it mentions with the consent of the property owner, doesn't it, Rep Driskell? I feel like that's what I remember the wording to be exactly.
It does not.
Well, it talks about credible evidence. So that's
Yeah.
to me, that's the biggest key, right? So, you have situations like, for example, with Zion. And gratefully, the Tampa Housing Authority was very much willing to work with the community on that. And there was credible evidence there, and that was wonderful. But as a task force, we heard public testimony from individuals who suggested that they were very concerned about the Rosewood Cemetery and that part of it may have been located under private property, and they were not able to get access to that property because the landowner was denying it. Now in Florida, we're very strong on property rights, and we want to make sure that we're not doing anything to weaken that. At the same time, we can acknowledge that there might be a compelling public policy interest or community interest in being able to investigate whether or not there may be a cemetery under private property. So the key piece there is credible evidence, whether that's the state or it could even be a local authority, and that's really the key.
Thank you.
Yes, and then I think next we have Emerald, and then we can go to Ben Montgomery.
Hi, everybody. My question relates to the education component. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about critical race theory and concerns surrounding that. And I'm just curious if you see the discussion around that as something that stands in the way of getting this implemented. And if so, how do you plan to reach across the aisle to get this done?
Well, that's a good question. When I take a look at all of the issue of critical race theory, I typically think of it in terms of a college level course. We'll continue to teach Black history in the high schools and junior high schools. And I think that that's an area in junior high and high school where some of this should be addressed. What do you think, Rep. Driskell?
Well, thank you for the question. And, I think Senator Cruz is hitting the nail on the head. It's really a non-issue to the extent that the state does not even allow for the teaching of critical race theory in Florida's K through 12 education system. It's not permitted. And so, that's an issue that's been used, I feel like, as a red herring to divide communities and to frighten parents. When I speak to parents and speak to constituents in the area, what they care about is factual history. They care about their kids being taught accurately. They care about teachers having the authority and the autonomy that they need to, create lesson plans that help their students advance and progress so that they can matriculate and go on and lead a good life. And so I would hate for this conversation to get bogged down in non-issues. What we're trying to teach in terms of these abandoned cemeteries is actual accurate, factual Florida history. It's not theory. It's about teaching the truth and some of the hard truths about our past, but hopefully in a way that bring those conversations here to the present so that our young people can help lead us into a far brighter future than we've been able to do.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I think Ben Montgomery is next.
Oh, hi, thank you. I wonder if you, maybe I missed this, but is there an initial ask in terms of a dollar amount out of the gate? What are you looking for? What does it take to get this thing launched?
There's not, and I think it's typical in legislation like this to request the appropriation from the legislature, and then we work that out in negotiations and hopefully in proviso.
Do you all have a sense of how much this might cost taxpayers?
That's a great question. I would hate to put out a number and then that change in negotiations, and then you come back to me in 60 days, Ben, and say that I misrepresented. So I don't have a number for you at this time, no.
And then oftentimes, Ben, we file a bill and the analyst, they assess the fiscal on it based on what they know or what they think they know. And sometimes we agree and oftentimes we disagree, but that's typically where the fiscal is assessed. So we'll wait and see what they assess here. But we know certainly that we're asking for 3 FTEs. So we're asking for 3 employees right off the bat. And there are other defined requests here, but then there are also some that are not quite so defined and we're not sure of.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Okay, I don't see any further questions in the chat, but were there any other questions from our media contacts who are online? Either feel free to alert us of the chat or feel free to take yourself off mute. Okay, Senator Cruz, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We have much work to do, but we've accomplished much here. So we're very excited about the fact that this whole effort is moving forward. Again, I'd like to thank the task force. I'd like to thank Paul Guzzo, who had the foresight to start writing about this and, spark the interest of all of us and those of us that have the ability to try to make a difference we have. I always love what Rep Driskell said in one of our first meetings where she said it was never too late. What did you say, Rep Driskell? It was never too late to right a wrong. And that's basically what we're working here for. And we intend to fight along the way, whether it's for the passage of this bill or some funding to get the program started. So we've only begun to fight.
Well,
Rep
thank you
Driskell,
all
you
so much for your time. We hope that you are having a happy new year, that your new years are off to a great start. Please stay safe and reach out to our offices if you have any questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.